Okay, so the origins of today then go back to 2010 when Zoe Davey, who's sitting over there, and myself started working on an ESRC project, that's the Economic and Social Research Council, and they're, for those of you who don't know, they're the research council that funds kind of most kind of sociological work, social science, kind of politics kind of research. And so in 2010 then we got money for a 2-year project at the University of Leeds, and that was exploring the significance and the experience of the 2004 Gender Recognition Act. Okay, so coming into law then in 2004, the GRA enabled some trans people to change their birth certificates, and this brought a kind of a new framework of citizenship then for trans people, increased kind of rights in relation to parenting, relationship status, tax benefits, and so on. Okay, so what the research project was interested then was how people themselves were experiencing both the process of recognition, you know, the evidence that you have to give, how you actually go through that legal process, but also we wanted to know what gender recognition meant. Okay, so it was about both the kind of the significance of the act for people themselves as well as the meanings. Okay, so we wanted to explore then the connections and the disconnections, okay, between kind of routes to citizenship as they're framed and come into action through law and policy, and the kind of the relationship with that, with people's everyday lives and people's own kind of understandings, both individually but also collectively as a community in social and political movements. Okay, and in your packs you've got the research report, okay, and I'm not going to speak to that very much now. Okay, but overall then what the research found, the kind of the key findings of the research, was that this new route to citizenship, or this new kind of pathway to citizenship then, was a very, very uneven pathway. And so while some people were benefiting from these new rights, okay, many other people then were kind of becoming more disenfranchised and further marginalised. Okay, so particularly people who did not kind of follow a medical route to transition, people who didn't identify as male or as female, and also people who didn't want to divorce their pre-transition partners. Okay, they were kind of the 3 criteria for gender recognition. People who didn't follow those were becoming kind of more disenfranchised, and what the research found then was that these new kind of legal routes to citizenship, to kind of rights in terms of equality and diversity, were actually fracturing an already kind of marginalised and disenfranchised community. So it was pretty pessimistic. Okay, while some people were benefiting, those people who were benefiting tended already to be kind of the most privileged sections of that marginalised community. So the research then spoke to a lot of scholarship, critical sexuality scholarship, which has been written by a lot of people who are going to come to this conference, a lot of the speakers themselves. The research supported those findings, which very much kind of cautioned against a rights-based approach to equality and diversity. And so the research found that moves towards equality often weren't really about diversity, and certainly weren't about kind of recognising or celebrating difference. Okay, so the research found that claims then, rights-based claims to citizenship, as they kind of come through law and policy, are often based on kind of notions and also practices of sameness, of asking for rights in relation to being the same as dominant groups, rather than a recognition and a celebration of difference. Okay, and so the research report then identifies kind of key areas of recommendation then for any redrafting of the GRA. Okay, and again, I'm not going to speak to all of those recommendations, but key to those recommendations was kind of the recognition of people who didn't follow a medical route to transition, recognition for people who didn't identify as male or female, and kind of getting rid of the divorce clause. Okay, so the research then wanted to put together some kind of policy recommendations then, but then the question is, you know, how do we as academics speak to other people? Okay, how do we kind of stop just having conversations always amongst ourselves? Okay, and so the ESRC then funding, which came after this, okay, which is a project that I've been working on with Steph, gave the opportunity then to try to kind of have conversations with people who weren't academics. So we held stakeholder conferences, seminars, and a whole series of kind of workshops with community support groups, with activists, and with people from gender diverse communities. Okay, so we kind of wanted to share our research, okay, share the research from Zoe and my project, okay, but we also kind of wanted to open up channels of communication between academics and non-academics. Okay, so we've had those seminars and we've had those workshops, okay, and then the last kind of event of that year's project then is our conference today. Okay, so bringing us on then to the conference today, we've themed this conference around what we felt were some of the key kind of themes to come out of the research. Okay, and this is all around that question mark in the conference title about recognising diversity, question mark, okay, and that question mark is absolutely central, okay, to a lot of the discussions that are going to be happening over the next 2 days. So what we wanted to do then was to talk about community organising and policy responses in terms of gender and sexual equality and diversity practices more broadly. Okay, so how are community groups responding, how are they experiencing what there has been, which is a huge raft, okay, not just in terms of transgender and gender diversity, but in terms of gender and sexuality, equality, law and policy more generally. So, you know, throughout the kind of the 90s and the early 2000s, there's been a whole raft of legislation started by New Labour, okay, which attempted to kind of to cater, if you like, for equalities and diversities. Okay, but that question mark about recognising diversity again kind of links back, it speaks back to the findings of our project, which very much kind of problematised the way in which diversity and difference was actually in practice recognised. So we're interested over the next 2 days then in looking at how community groups, okay, respond to those policy moves, okay. And we're also interested in looking at how community groups and academics and people working kind of in a variety of ways around equality and diversity, okay, resist those moves, okay, so resist those kind of claims based on notions of sameness, resist those kind of rights-based claims. We're also very much interested in kind of cultural politics and the ways in which journalists and bloggers and artists also respond to kind of changing legal and policy climates. Okay, so what's being said by kind of activists in terms of those contexts. And that links on to kind of the idea of queering activism and theory. Okay, so if we remember that question mark, what does that question mark kind of bring to the table in terms of the ways in which we can rethink policy and law? Okay, can we rethink it? Okay, can we queer policy and law? Okay, intersectionality is also incredibly important and runs through all this. So how is policy and law experienced in relation to other kind of identity factors? How do factors such as race, age, sexuality intersect with gender and vice versa? Okay, how does social class matter in relation to new frameworks and new pathworks for citizenship? can some people become new citizens easier than others? Okay, so that question of intersectionality runs through not just that panel, but runs through a lot of the papers that we're going to hear over the next 2 days. Okay, as does the question of intimacy and how people live their sexual and personal lives. Okay, so again, how do policy changes impact on people's own personal, everyday lives? How does it impact on relationships? You know, if you have to divorce from your transition partner who you might have been with for several decades, had children with, are kind of, you know, wrapped up financially with, and so on, to kind of, you know, to have to choose between leaving that relationship and gaining gender recognition. How does that impact on your family, you know, family in the broadest sense, and on your everyday intimate lives? Okay, which brings us to the last theme then, which is about resisting the notion of liberation. Okay, so quite often we're told this story, it's a story which says that things have got better. Okay, it's a progression narrative. Okay, it's about the way that the world has changed for the better. Okay, and what our research has found, and I think what lots of people's papers are going to speak to, is problematising that notion of a kind of a smooth and easy journey from kind of troubled times to a progressive, more equal and kind of more diverse more times. Okay, so we're going to question kind of the notion of this kind of trajectory of progress. Okay, so they're the key themes, and we're going to hand over now to the first panel, who are going to